There we go, it works. I'll start with a little bit of an apology because I've kind of gone off-piste. I'm looking a little bit broader than estates and facilities. I hope that's okay with everyone. So I'm Kim Croasdale. I work in the Greener NHS team in NHS England Midlands. I'm going to talk about making sustainability business as usual, which is BAU there. The phrase that I really like, but I couldn't use, is from bolt-on to built-in. The brilliant Brian E. Peat from Circular Life has already co-opted it, so we've settled for this. But the problem is I'm not actually sure if it's over-promising. Much like the amazing publicity I got for speaking at this event, I don't feel like I have the answers. And some of the questions this morning suggest that none of us do. I'm just trying to bring together what I've learned over the past 15 years in a succinct and clear way. So I hope it's interesting. If it's not, it's only 15 minutes of your time. Maybe you can play acronym bingo because this is the NHS. So why me? If I don't have the answers, why am I the one standing here talking about this? To be honest, it's because this topic just feels so live and important to me right now. And just to highlight how live and important it is, the Health Foundation published a report last week on net zero care. What will it take? I'll come back to that a little bit later. And then the government made a really interesting announcement. So I think that's actually only made this even more important. And I think my experiences have led to a fairly good understanding of why things aren't working at the moment. So I'll tell you a bit about my experiences first, so you know why I'm up here. I've been working in sustainability in some form for 15 years. I started off in behaviour change. Is anyone familiar with Green Impact? Woohoo, yeah. Wasn't expecting that. Yeah, so that's where I started out. I've been working in policy and strategy increasingly over the past 10 years. I've been working with health organisations for around 8 or 9 years, jumped ship into the NHS around 6 years ago, and that was when I really started getting a crash course in health policy. I joined the Sustainable Development Unit. Does anyone remember them? Another whoop. So I joined them, and while I was there, my ex-colleague Rick and I were the ones who wrote the first climate change commitments to be included in national NHS policy in the long-term plan. Yes, it was in the appendix. No, it wasn't enough. The targets probably weren't the right ones. Yes, it prompted more questions than answers, but for the first time, national health policy referred to climate change as something important. So we celebrated. Since then, I've seen the shift of sustainability in the NHS from a team of 7 in an anonymous and tiny office on the outskirts of Cambridge to a national team of 51 after the restructure reduced them. I led on the work to build the regional teams when I was in the national team before moving to the Midlands team, and now there are teams of 2 to 4 in every region, again, after the restructure. And that's not including people and providers working on this, much like most of you out there. There aren't enough of us, but there are a hell of a lot more than when I started. So while in the Midlands, I've been working with colleagues to build sustainability into the BAU governance processes that monitor the position and progress of ICSs. Is everyone familiar with ICSs, integrated care systems? Okay, good, mostly nods. And this is how we've done it. So the systems that we work with on the far side, they have regular meetings and boards. In the middle, we in the region have regular meetings and boards. We talk a lot about what's happening and what isn't happening, and then we use that information to feed into the quadrant model. So this is the quadrant model. It's led by the strategy and transformation team, and it's used to assess ICSs and ICBs as part of the national oversight framework. Basically what happens is that we have ISRMs, internal system review meetings. They're for NHS England colleagues to discuss what's happening in specific systems. Issues raised there can be taken to the external system review meetings, which are held with the system, and then up to the quarterly system review meetings, which is held by the regional director with the systems. Basic understanding. So we sit in the ISRMs and the ESRMs, and we can raise information to go into the QSRMs. Who loves a good acronym? It's not a totally accurate explanation, it'll do for now. Basically what it means is that greener issues get discussed alongside other high priority programmes like cancer, nursing and finance. But despite that achievement, this year I've been feeling really angry and frustrated, basically since going back to work after having my first child. Now I'm pregnant with my second, I'm feeling it even more. Sometimes I blame it on hormones. Mostly I blame it on feeling like despite all the time and effort and energy and talking and influencing and cajoling and knocking on doors and persuading and presenting the evidence, climate change still isn't being taken seriously. It's still an add-on. It's never the bit that's escalated to the QSRMs. And having kids has really put the spotlight on the urgency for me. So hopefully this gives you an idea of why I'm up here standing talking about this. I'm not an expert. It feels like the more I learn, the less I know, but I think I'm beginning to understand why things aren't being embedded and the questions we need to ask. These ideas may not be groundbreaking to you. Hopefully it'll be helpful to gather them all in one place, and I'd love to have some conversations with you later about how we can address them. Take a deep breath. The barriers, this is the negative bit. Consequences. So first of all, what is it that makes people do stuff? In the kind of firefighting emergency day-to-day of the NHS, it's quite often simply whether not doing stuff will get people fired, fined or financially compensated, or in extreme cases jailed. Our contacts in the Midlands turn around to us regularly and say, I won't lose my job if we miss our greener targets. I might if we miss our cancer targets. So that's where they focus their efforts. It's quite simple. We lack the power here. Number 2, urgency. The stuff that gets prioritised is the stuff that we can see is an immediate issue, or things that are included on the priority lists of important people and programmes. We can see patients dying in ambulances or in corridors while waiting for beds or transfers. We can see we're missing our cancer targets. But the truth is, climate change is an immediate issue, regardless of what government said last week. Last year, they published the Climate Change Risk Assessment, which really showed that it is. An additional 2,500 deaths were recorded across England during the heatwave in 2020. Up to 90% of hospital wards could be at risk from overheating due to their design. Up to 10% of UK hospitals are located in areas of significant flood risk, and approximately 1.9 million people live in areas at significant risk of flooding. We are already seeing flooding and heat waves causing breakdowns to the health system and severe consequences for health. This image is of a flood at Warsaw Manor Hospital after storm drains overflowed due to rainwater and hail in June 2020, same year as those heat waves. Flooding occurred around a ward entrance, a rear entrance to the ICU, outside the emergency theatre and a staff coffee room area, as well as coming through the ceiling above theatres and the acute medical unit. Staff worked through the night to clear debris. They had to move operations to another theatre, and they had to open a temporary entrance. And none of these facts even take into account the massive and increasing mental health impacts that we are feeling due to climate change. Climate change is already having an impact on our health and our health system, so anyone who claims it's not is downright wrong, but it's too big. We can't point to a heat wave and say it's categorically due to climate change, although we're getting closer. We're also only ever able to project things beyond a time frame that's reasonable for the NHS to act in. So we know that there's a projected large increase in health needs between now and 2040 because of an increasingly ageing population. But we need to get to the end of the day, the week, the month, the year. The year might be pushing it a bit. So that urgency message is not being heard, and it's not being talked about with the right level of importance. The third barrier is measurement. We can't accurately measure these things in a timely manner. The latest carbon footprint that we have for the whole of the NHS is from 2019 to 20. And carbon footprints can only ever be an estimate because of how difficult it is to actually measure carbon. Measurements we have are somewhat arbitrary, and let's be honest, carbon doesn't actually mean a lot to most people. They can be very good estimates, and they can be based on very robust data, and we undeniably need the information, but it's still not enough for us to point at a piece of work and say this did that. I thought we might need cheering up. So this is showing emissions from volatile gases going down over the past 6 years. Shout out to Frank and all the anaesthetists and colleagues in the room. There's been incredible work from anaesthetists that you may have heard about this morning to ditch the desflurane being an anaesthetic gas with particularly high global warming potential. But this data is an estimate based on the use of anaesthetic gases. It's not as accurate as we need to know. It's also probably not as timely as we need, even though this is one of the areas we're better at measuring. We're aiming to meet net zero carbon emissions by 2040, but we won't know whether we've achieved that until a good year or two later because of the way we have to measure carbon emissions. And this is despite a huge amount of amazing work from data teams across the country. I'm not doing them a disservice, it's the data they're working with and the targets we have that are the problem. So what do we need? So hopefully this will be the bit that gets our juices flowing. My ideas are just starters. As I said, I'd love to discuss with some of you later. If you've read the Health Foundation report I mentioned earlier, you'll notice that my conclusions are slightly different. And this is because I think that their conclusions are probably still looking broader and longer term than is helpful for us dealing with it day to day. I don't think any of us would disagree that we need more capacity and capability in the workforce and leadership, but my challenge is that we need to tackle the drivers of that. Similarly, I think we all understand that we need supportive policy processes, but what do those realistically look like? The CQC Single Assessment Framework has added the question, we understand any negative impact of our activities on the environment and we strive to make a positive contribution in reducing it and support people to do the same. But how do leaders start to answer that question when our measurements are still so vague and out of sync? What will happen if the answer to the question isn't satisfactory? And how will we even measure what is and isn't satisfactory? So here are my thoughts, which, by the way, I did come up with before the report was published. We need real consequences for not doing this work. Sadly, a consequence of not doing something, being carbon emissions or climate change, is just not enough. The consequences need to be immediate, painful or positive, public and proportionate. And to help come up with those appropriate consequences, we need to make it clear that climate change is an urgent issue by framing it as the health outcomes of climate change. People are dying because of air pollution. People are dying because of heat waves. People are dying because of flooding. Our health service is being pummeled by people with illnesses that are going to get worse because of climate change. Our health service sees disproportionately more people from groups that are disproportionately affected by climate change. Our health service is making people ill because of the way it runs. And these are issues that need to be discussed seriously at board level in every NHS organisation. They are issues that need to have people taking responsibility at board level, senior management level, middle management level, delivery level, and in the clinical world. And lastly, we need to set targets that we can measure in real time that might mean something to people and where responsibility is held by the right teams. One of our targets this year is to reduce the carbon emissions associated with inhalers by 25%. Another is to assist preparation for future readiness for low-carbon heating systems. These pieces of work are valuable and necessary, but how will we know when we succeed? How will we know if we're even on track? We need targets that are measurable in real time or as close as possible, and ones that we can actually impact directly. We can have targets based on inhaler prescriptions or anaesthetic gas usage, rather than the carbon emissions resulting from them. And those targets need to be imposed upon the people who control the activity. The Greener NHS team shouldn't hold responsibility for reducing nitrous oxide by X% because we're not the ones who use it. Once we've got these three things, I think we will start to get the right narrative coming from the right people, and senior leadership will start to prioritise climate change mitigation and adaptation. The reality is that the way this is done probably won't be the same in every organisation, but this is what we're going to try and implement in the Midlands. I'd love to hear about any organisations that feel like you're already doing this or already working on it. I'd love to learn from you and share your experiences. And I just wanted to finish by reminding everyone that carbon isn't the be-all and end-all. Sometimes the things that motivate people aren't carbon, shockingly. And the greener work covers all sorts of other priority areas. We've got inequality and poverty too mentioned here. So we need to not have carbon tunnel vision. We need to look broader at what it is we're trying to do. Where next? Thank you very much for listening to me. I hope it was interesting and at least somewhat enlightening. I'm not trying to do anyone a disservice here. I fully appreciate the amount of hard work that we all put into this, the amount of passion, personal commitment, sacrifice and effort that we all make personally and professionally. We've got this far precisely because of that. But to go further,